Well, first of all, thanks for choosing my presentation. And we've got a full house here, and I was expecting maybe 7 people. So this is absolutely mind-blowing. The presentation I want to do today, I'm so passionate about AI, and I hope that you guys come out feeling really passionate as well by the time this is over. I want to talk about a number of different things. I want to start off by talking about the human mind, because I think if we're going to talk about AI, we should probably talk about what AI is trying to copy. And so I want to show the human mind, some of the faults that human beings have and ways that AI could come in and actually plug those gaps. And then I want to kind of talk a little bit about the future. Tom kind of touched on some of this stuff earlier on as well, but I think it's important because there's so many questions going around about, is AI going to replace all of our jobs, and all these different kind of scares and fears that people have, and I understand that. So I want to walk through all of that in the presentation. There's going to be quite a lot to cover today. So a little bit about me. So I was hired by Tom to come on although I have a master's in AI, my main experience is customer experience. I'm one of those guys that's kind of fought his way through the organizational hierarchy and butted heads with pretty much everybody, and I've always been very frustrated how people would not put customers first. I've been in an organization that was taken over by 2 investment companies. I saw what they did to the employees, I saw what they did to the customers, and so I became very passionate about that. I found the Customer Experience Professionals Association. There's a member, the other member in Springfield's here today as well, Andy Whaley, and that's kind of, that was going to plug a lot into the stuff that we're going to talk about with AI. Eric mentioned in the intro about deep learning natural language. I'm building a natural language processor for JMark right now. I'm going to give a little demo of that later on. And then the other thing I wanted to mention was although I'm very passionate about customer experience, artificial intelligence, a lot of real cool things I enjoy, my real passion is with animal shelters. If there's anyone else in the room that does a lot of volunteering or anything like that, I'd love to talk to you afterwards. It all started for me when I found this dog on a side of a road in 2015 in July. I was one of those people, me and my wife, not planning to get a dog, always kept putting it off. It was never the right time. And then we find this little guy, and he'd been thrown out of a truck. He had 5 broken ribs. We didn't know if he was going to live. And I met this dog, and then everything just snowballed from there, and it went into, talking to one rescue, talking to another. Suddenly I'm doing transport to Joplin, and it's just one of the most fulfilling things that's ever happened to me. So I wanted to make sure my little dog Basil got an acknowledgement here today. So before we talk about AI, let's talk about natural intelligence. So being human and the nature of resistance. So Tom had a slide earlier on, if you saw it, the path of least resistance. This is a really interesting concept, and it's a little more complex than you might think. So the idea is, first of all, you can put a set of choices. Do you want to go to the bookstore, buy from Amazon, do the math, use a calculator, and so forth and so forth. And there's a metric out there called the customer effort score that kind of measures this stuff, but it's a little bit more complicated than just how much effort am I going to have to put into something. And this is kind of where we start to look at the human mind and the role that plays. The path of least resistance essentially is something that accelerates innovation. So because if you think about the world that we live in now, we've pretty much got it very good, especially here in the Western world. But if you look back to our ancestors and what they had to go through, if you look back to the animal world, or to our human ancestors thousands of years ago, sometimes you never knew when you were going to get your next meal. Things weren't as easy. And so what you would naturally do, and it happened over time through adaptation, is you would choose the path of least resistance. You conserve your energy. And so that's just how we're wired. You could argue that we're lazy, but hell, there's nothing wrong with that. At the end of the day, we're just trying to achieve an objective and do it in a way that expends the minimal amount of effort. But it's great, because then businesses see this and they say, okay, so how can we exploit this? And so suddenly you have this innovation, which leads not only through history, like we've seen on the slide here, but all the way through and into our future as well. And actually, by understanding this idea of choosing the path of least resistance, it helps us to find new innovative ways. Tom talked about value in his presentation, and so I see that when you reduce the path of least resistance, what you're essentially doing is adding value. He mentioned Netflix, so the idea is that this doesn't just apply to products, it applies to product groups as well. So you could have the DVD player and you could have the VHS recorder. There are kind of product groups, and now they've been replaced by streaming media. So you don't just see products beating each other, but you see entire paradigm shifts through time, and that's going to play into that artificial intelligence. So that's kind of why I wanted to bring that up. And so there's actually a study that they did to just confirm this, and they tested people and the amount of effort they were willing to put in to achieve a result. And so again, like I say, We're lazy, but it's not really a bad word. It's just how we're wired. And if we can understand that in our businesses, then we can actually start to exploit that to make better services for our customers. So there's a really interesting book. I've got a few book recommendations here. I'm a bit of a book junkie. This one's really cool, Descartes' Error. And basically what it does is it looks at the decision-making process. In the customer experience world, we kind of understand that the majority of decisions that are made, and you'll see this number, 90% float around, but the number of decisions that we make is very high based off of emotion rather than rational choices. And there's a few points I put here that you guys can review in the slides later on, but basically customer experience has become such a differentiator now, and it's for this very reason that we're looking at the emotions, how somebody feels, and that kind of ties into the path of least resistance as well, which I'll come to in the next few slides. Oops. Oh yeah, there we go. So the scarf model. So I heard about this recently, and I thought that this really explained the dynamic that's going on in the human mind very well. So a guy named David Rock did some research into neuroscience, and he came up with this model called the scarf model. And basically what it is, it's a way of trying to understand things that trigger us, things that trigger the fight or flight mode in us. And he came up with these 5: status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. And this is very useful because not only can you use this if you have a personal coach, for example, they'll probably talk to you about this, and you can try to understand situations in your personal life or in business where you can understand how certain things are triggering you, and then use that to overcome that, like engage the rational part of your brain to kind of bring that reaction down. But as business owners, what we can do is look at this and say, well, there's a positive side as well as the negative side. So if I actually play on these areas, I can actually improve someone's life, improve the customer experience, and that will ultimately help the business because customer experience has been tied to ROI. And so just to give some quick examples, think about when you're in traffic, and I'm one of these guys for sure. If you had a choice between being stuck in gridlock traffic for 20 minutes and you need somebody to possibly let you out on a road, we have this just down in Ozark actually, would you do that, or would you rather the slightly longer journey, but you know it's going to be as guaranteed as possible, there might be roadworks, but as guaranteed as possible that it's just going to be a nice long drive and a nice pleasant drive, and it's going to take a little bit longer. And this is because the scarf model is in play. Because what it is the certainty part is playing a role. You're uncertain if someone's going to let you out. You're uncertain if this gridlock is going to take 20 minutes or it's going to take longer. You've got really no control. That's the autonomy part of scarf playing a role as well. So you can see immediately how human decisions are, and this is what I call the resistance, the path of least resistance, is more complicated than just getting there the quickest. There's also what I would call the energy that goes into an activity. And another great example, status was one of the 5 on the scarf model as well. And that's why some people would much rather pay a lot more money and have the car on the right, when essentially what you're really buying is just something that does exactly the same thing, just takes you from A to B. So that scarf model is incredibly useful in not only understanding the emotional part of our brain, but also understanding how we can exploit the emotional part of our brain to produce better customer experiences. And so I've kind of taken those 5 areas and I've kind of given some examples here. So ways to improve the customer experiences, make experiences predictable, repeatable, and consistent. So I'll give you a great example. I had my phone banking many years ago, and I used to call them up, tell them what the problem was. They'd ask a few questions, and then they'd solve the problem for me. I stopped getting statements at my house. I didn't get any bank statements. I don't know what was going on. So I called them up and I said, hey, I'm not getting any bank statements. Can you just check the box or whatever it is you need to do so I get my bank statements to my house? And just in a really aggressive tone, treated with suspicion, this guy starts asking me all these questions. I had no idea what was going on. And he asked me, well, what did you buy on, well, you bought a train ticket 2 days ago. How much did it cost? And I said, well, I don't get my statements. I'll tell you if I have my statements. And so it ended up really badly. I wrote a letter to the company, complained about him. I actually then played like call center roulette and called up again, got a really nice girl, explained the situation and solved the problem. I mentioned that in my letter. The business defended the guy and said they were going to work on retraining the girl. That helped me out. And so this is an example. This is a classic example of businesses that don't understand customer experience. If you understand customer experience, you understand that if there's going to be something that changes, you really need to proactively let the users know about it because it makes a much more certain, comfortable experience. Treat customers as assets, not adversaries, would be one that I would say for status. Now, something very important to note is that's not just being nice to people's faces, that's cultural. You need to make sure that people within the company really respect the clients, really understand that clients are the people that pay their wages, and so that needs to be a cultural thing. And if that's broken on the inside, people will see through the facade, if you're just trying to be nice and plastic on the outside. Payments should equal the value added by the business. This is the fair part of that model. So what this means is if you have two clients, they're both paying you $100 a month, they should expect to receive the same service. If one of them is not and they start talking with each other, there's going to be a problem. Likewise, if one's paying 100, one's paying 200, you would expect the one paying 200 to receive more. If they're not, they're receiving the same value. Again, if they talk, there's going to be a problem. So people really believe in fairness. The other thing you should do is exhibit behaviours that strengthen the relationship, because relatedness is something that's very strong. We don't really have a chief customer officer here at JMark, but we have a role similar to it, which is Jeff Bendura. And what he did is he actually played a customer. Well, he recorded an audio of him talking about the reaction to a call that he just had with one of our clients, and he shared it with the teams. And he said, "Listen, I want you to really understand that this is a relationship." And he started talking about the client and things that they'd said, and vacations they were taking, and it really helps to just get to know people better, because that makes so much more. And I think really business in the new economy is going to be related more on trust and relationships than it is anything else. So again, very important to note the relatedness one. And then the last one is to ensure the customer feels they have a level of control. So what this really is essentially is getting down to is sometimes a customer will call up and they'll have a problem, and we will pull them into what we call customer service funnels. Those annoying phone systems where press 1 for this, press 6 for this, and it takes, you don't want to do that. You want to basically say, here's my customer, they got a problem, here's the solution, what's the path of least resistance? And so some of the stuff that Tom was demoing earlier on, where you can click a button and get a call immediately, that's definitely going in the right direction for JMark. So as I say, when you elevate all of these areas, you create a much more delightful customer experience. When you do the opposite, you start increasing resistance. Someone's getting really sick of pressing those 1 and 6. Maybe they're just going to hang up. Maybe they're going to tell someone about it. Maybe you've just lost a customer. Now, this is a fantastic book, The Power of Moments. There was one quote in this book that blew me away. We don't know when we are creating a memory. And it's so true. 5 years from now, what are you going to remember from this JMarks conference? What are you going to remember from this talk? You really don't know. You don't know if you remember any of it. You might remember some aspects of it. And this is becoming a new area in customer experience now, where you really want to create real great moments. And by a moment, what we mean is something that's memorable and meaningful. And when you think about brands, like Tom mentioned earlier, when you look at just the logos and so forth, and then the badges of honor, for me, brands basically are a bundle of associations. And you have all these associations, like when people say United Airlines, what's one of the first things that comes to your mind? Of course, because it's stuck out so badly, the guy being dragged, the poor dog that was put in the overhead compartment. So that's a way to think about your business in terms of branding. It's like maybe focus on doing the right things and creating the right moments for people, and that ends up becoming your best marketing. So this talks about, it's supposed to be about AI, and we haven't really talked about AI, but now we're going to talk about AI. So the key is, how will AI reduce resistance in our lives? Well, here's some quick examples. So you can wait until 8 a.m. for the customer service to open, or you can just go and speak to a chatbot right now. You can call in to report a system failure, or how about the AI just fixes it proactively, you never even knew about it. This is an actual one that's happening right now. If your car's involved in an accident, some cars are equipped to call 911 on your behalf, especially if it's detected as being a very serious impact. And then this is a great example. Do you scramble to check the weather or react when you're woken by tornado sirens, or do you have your phone alert you 20 minutes in advance? And I put the caveat in there is, can anyone guess why the person in this example didn't have a weather radio? Too much resistance. Oh, I don't want to have to go out and buy it. I don't want to have to set it up and scroll through that horrible user interface. I'd rather just not worry about it. We don't get tornadoes in Missouri. That kind of thing. So the history of AI. So I like to lump the first 3 areas into one and just kind of call it like the old AI, and then the last one I like to call new AI. And I'll kind of walk you through the journey, but basically it started off in the 50s and we had our golden years. Essentially what this meant is technology existed so that we were in a position to actually start making artificial intelligence. So we had our first chatbots, we had our first simple programs that played chess and other games. Then we went into and then with AI, there's always been AI summers where there's lots of enthusiasm, lots of investment, and then there's the AI winters where everyone's like, yeah, this really didn't pan out, it's kind of a waste of money. And so these kind of represent the AI summers and the AI winters. So we had another one in the 80s, and this is where expert systems and neural networks came about. So when you hear about the most advanced stuff that's going on right now, that's a technology called neural networks. They were actually created back in the 80s. And we got so far with them and then kind of gave up. And really the only thing that changed was the microprocessor, or Moore's law as they call it, where the power doubles every year. And essentially it got to a point where now the neural networks are able, because if you think about our brain and how many billions of nodes that we've got in there, we weren't able to replicate that in systems back then. So then in the kind of like the third wave where you've got man versus machine, we started to see the power of the processor come into play, and that's where you saw some very famous man versus machine matches, which we'll talk about later on. And then you have the new phase now, which is deep learning, and this is the power of the processor mixed with the neural network. And the most cutting edge thing that exists right now is called neuroevolution. I've got some really cool stuff to show you on neuroevolution. So the origins are, many people consider Alan Turing to be the father of artificial intelligence. I'm sure you've all heard of the movie The Imitation Game, beautiful film. If anyone hasn't seen it, then I recommend it. It basically talks about Alan Turing. He solved the Enigma riddle in World War II. And then went on to start theorizing about could machines be intelligent, and he wrote a paper about it. But what was interesting is he created a test called the Turing test. And the idea of the Turing test, and these have been carried out for years. I remember watching Turing tests 20 years ago on television. The idea is that you'd have a human who's kind of like the judge, and then there'd be a wall, and there'd be 2 individuals behind that wall in booth A and booth B. One was a computer and one was a human, and they both talked to the judge. And then at the end of the conversation, the judge has to decide which one was human and which one was computer. And they said if the computer could fool the human, then therefore it must be intelligence. That was the thesis that Alan Turing put forwards. However, another notable scientist at the time by the name of John Searle actually had a very good critique of it, and he actually proposed a thought experiment for his critique. And he said, look, imagine you place a person in a room and they are fed Chinese symbols, and then they have a rule book, and the rule book says if I get this Chinese symbol and this one, I do this. He essentially said that's how the Turing test is working. It's not really intelligent, it's just pattern matching, and people on the outside of that box are feeding their symbols in and they're getting these answers and they're like, wow, this thing's incredible. But is it really? But then my argument to that would be, well, isn't that really how we just operate, just at a much more complex level? So you end up getting into a much more deep philosophical debate about what is intelligence and what is thinking, and I don't really think that's necessary for this kind of presentation, but as part of the history of AI, I thought this was really cool and I wanted to share this with you. Eliza is the chatbot that I've mentioned here. Eliza was a great piece of software because people enjoyed talking with it. It responded with these really weird questions back to you, and people found it like a psychiatrist, and they could talk about their problems, and it would say, well, why do you feel that way? And tell me about your mother, those kind of things. So Eliza was great, and that was many, many years ago. So there's this thing called the Loebner Prize. Now, the Loebner Prize was set up by Hugh Loebner in 1990 with a big chunk of money as the prize. And the idea was to run the Turing test every year. It still happens. Last year they ran it at Bletchley Park, which is where Alan Turing was stationed when he cracked the Enigma code. And the best one so far has been called Mitsuku. Would you believe it? Here in Ozark, we have a gentleman that came second in the world, and I had no idea that there was even anyone else doing this kind of stuff around here. And he was just a guy that worked at a company that I worked at a few years ago, and we got talking. But Mitsuku, you can see, it's still not great. Do you prefer red or white wine? Well, I like red in all the primary colours. So it's kind of there, it's kind of pattern matching, and the reason is because it's just using this real basic thing called artificial intelligence markup language, and it's just patterns, someone says, what is your name? And it either has a pre-planned response like the top example, or in the bottom example, it's got the data stored somewhere, so it can remember things. Someone might say, my name is John, and then later in the conversation they might say, hey, what was my name? Just to test if the thing's intelligent. So that's really the extent to artificial intelligence markup language. Now, robotics isn't AI, but AI is put in robotics. And I was actually really impressed when I was researching this at what we were able to achieve in the 70s and 80s. Not to mention we put a man on the moon in the 60s. So with the robotics, there's this thing that was created in Japan called Wabot 1. And this thing was able to walk around, grab objects, sense things around it. They claim it had the mental faculty of a 1.5-year-old, but I mean, lots of people make claims. The follow-up was really impressive though. So the follow-up, you could give it a sheet of music and it would be able to read the music and then understand it and play the keyboards. And there's some really cool YouTube videos of Wabot 2 out there. And it's pretty impressive, I have to say, for something that was done in the 80s. Then came along expert systems, and expert systems are very simple. The idea is you have a knowledge base of information, a database if you will. Then you have an inference engine which says I've got a bunch of rules that I'm going to use to manipulate that data, and then you have a user interface on the end which you talk to the human with. Expert systems are everywhere now, and to give you a real good example is when you do the spell check in Microsoft Word, that's basically an expert system because it's seeing that there's a problem with this inference engine, it's going into the database, it's pulling out a list of what it thinks are the closest words, and then it's presenting it to the user. So expert systems are essentially there to help humans make better decisions. And that's a theme that we'll see a lot as AI continues to progress. I was quite young back at the time, but in 1993, there was an explosion, kind of like there was in the Fisher-Spassky days in the 70s in America. In England, we had an explosion of chess interest because the reigning world champion Kasparov came to London and played Nigel Short. And I was just glued to the television. It was incredible. And they had this little expert system that they were using that allowed the digital blackboarding, and it was called Fritz. And Fritz would allow you to, look at some of the possible moves they were going to play, look at some of the tactics. And what's great about Fritz is it's just evolved so powerfully now with the advancement of the microprocessor that no human can beat Fritz anymore. It's that good. And people now use it. So grandmasters, when they play chess tournaments, they pull Fritz up and they know who their opponents are going to be in the tournament. So they pull a list of all their opponents' games and they're able to go through, and then they can even ask Fritz, what would you recommend would be a move that would catch this guy out? So now you don't have humans just competing with each other like the good old days. You have them, in the good old days they had seconds, other grandmasters that would do research. Now the system's taken over that role, and so the system's helping them come up with new ideas. There was a tournament recently where a guy played a crazy move, and when they asked him how he came up with it, he said, I just had Fritz suggest it to me. So it's just amazing what these expert systems are doing now. So then 1993 onwards, and this is just great. Again, looking back, it's amazing to think that this happened. So we had twin robot cars driving more than 1,000 kilometers on a Paris 3-lane highway. And I mean, look at the speeds. That's just amazing. Kasparov was beaten, as many of you probably remember, by Deep Blue in 1997. Then we had NASA's rovers go out and explore the surface of Mars autonomously. And then the game of checkers was solved in 2007. What I mean by solved is that they found a way that a computer could use brute force if it had the first move to win the game every time. And then we come to where we are now, the age of deep learning. So Microsoft launched Kinect, a machine learning platform, in 2010. It can track the movements of the human body. If you've ever seen Ghost Adventures, the TV show, they use a similar thing to try and find ghosts in the room, which is quite interesting. There's IBM Watson beat Jeopardy champions in 2011. Then AlphaGo defeated the world's strongest human. There's a Netflix documentary about this. It's absolutely fantastic if you haven't seen it. I thoroughly recommend it. And then there's AlphaZero, which was the new version of AlphaGo that wasn't pre-programmed with any information. It was just given the rules and had to learn on its own by playing against itself. It learned chess in 4 hours and beat the best computer 28-0. And then the most recent thing, which is 2018, is Microsoft and Alibaba created AIs that outperformed students at the Stanford University reading and comprehension test. So the future. Now this is where the neuroevolution comes in. So neuroevolution is actually outperforming the algorithms that have been developed by DeepMind. DeepMind are the creators of AlphaZero. So artificial intelligence with neuroevolution. So think about this. Think about brains that are just randomly generated and then given a task. Some will do okay, some will not do okay. And the idea is you take these brains, you take the DNA that creates them, and you reproduce the strongest performers with one another, and the chance of them being reproduced is relative to their strength. The weaker performers die off, and essentially what you end up with is these these neural networks that you don't have to train on data over and over again. You just let them go and they compete against each other and they evolve as they do, and it seems a very natural and obvious way to solve a problem, especially when you're looking at artificial intelligence and artificial life. So I'm going to show you a really cool video now, if it will let me play it. I'm supposed to have a play button somewhere here. Oh.
Spacebar.
What do I need to do?
Press spacebar.
Spacebar? Nope, that didn't work.
That's good.
Well, this is a shame. When my computer isn't in this mode, it works perfectly. I'm just going to have to talk through.
You can probably hit escape to get out of presentation rather than manually hit play.
Yeah, if you guys are okay with that. All right, here we go. So what you're seeing on the screen right now is some cars, some self-autonomous cars that were randomly evolved. Generation 1, they're all over the place, but one did slightly better than the other ones, and they took the genes from that one and they created a brand new population, and now you can see that it's a little bit better, it's getting a little bit further. And the way that they ranked the strength of the individuals was just basically on how far it's traveled. You're not looking at anything else. And the individual autonomous vehicles have 6 sensors, and all they do is say what's in front, what's to the side, and what's behind. Normally, these simulations take a while to run, and so when someone does one, they'll post a video on YouTube with their research, and then they'll kind of do a crossfade, say here's what happened at generation 100. So I found this guy who'd done this research. I told him about the stuff that Uber AI laboratories were doing. I talked about a particular technique and I sent it to him. He played around with it. I then find out this guy's 16 years old, some kid in Egypt. So this is just, the new world is amazing. And so anyway, he then takes the ideas I've given him, changes them a little bit, and then he said, he wrote me this email and he was really excited. He said, you're not going to believe it. He said, it went so fast, I didn't even need to speed the video up. And so this is generation 4 that we're on now, and look where they are. You've got this whole cluster of cars that have gone pretty much halfway. What's interesting is they get around the corner and then there's some kind of real challenging things that they've not seen before. So you want to see how they do. And I think this guy's going to crash. And then we go to generation 5. And I actually speed the video up now to generation 6 because generation 6 is the one where they solve it. And you'll get to see from that one performer when they mutated his genes how the rest of them are going to do based off of that now. And you'll see that the cars are driving much more elegantly through the maze. There's a great deal more of them moving through. This is the halfway point now, so we've got is it just one car, 2 cars maybe stuck together, I think. And then they'll navigate this tricky area, and then they'll come around the corner, and then I think that's it, they're out of the maze. And no one programmed this, no one designed this, no one said, well, if the wall is X amount away from the left sensor, then I'm going to speed up the left wheel. That's typically how you would do something like this if you were going to do this as a project. This thing figured it out on its own, and there it goes all the way to the end. So this is a very simple example of neuroevolution. They're using them to play computer games now, they're using them to solve problems. They're really impressive. And if you don't mind, I'm just going to keep my presentation in this mode because it's just going to make it easier for me to play the other videos. So now on to the big questions. How will AI change business as we know it? Will AI replace millions of jobs? What can we do about this, and how can I get started using AI in my business? So how will it change business as we know it? Well, there's some obvious things. So it's going to allow humans to focus on more strategic customer-related jobs. It's going to handle the dirty work for us. You guys probably all heard about flight MH370 recently. They were looking for it in the Pacific Ocean. They weren't having much luck. Basically what happened was there was a similar flight from Air France that went down in the Atlantic Ocean. Similar thing, they couldn't find it, so they deployed these autonomous agents that can go to the depths that humans can't, and they can intelligently look. Within 1 week, they've discovered the wreckage, so they're doing the same thing. And it's the same principle. Anything that's hard, I don't want to lift something and hurt my back. Well, Boston Dynamics has robots now that can lift very heavy weights. And as long as it's repetitive, monotonous work, that's the kind of stuff that they're going to be able to do. They're going to make us smarter. This was an example with the expert systems. It's going to be more they're going to inform us to make better decisions. And this last point is very interesting. It will increase workplace happiness. And I'll touch on that in a little bit and explain why I say that. So the problems that we have with human workers is that we have two brains essentially. We have the prefrontal cortex, which is the part that makes all the really logical decisions, and then we have the amygdala, which makes all of the raw emotional decisions. This is where the scarf model comes into play. The problem is that tiredness, stress can affect basic cognitive function. I'm going to give you two examples. I used to work at Springfield Public Schools before I joined JMark. I was called into a meeting and asked to produce a piece of software, which I've labelled here as the QR code. And I said, what do you guys want? It was the police that asked me. And they said, what we want is if there's a tornado barreling down on us, or there's a fire, or there's an active shooter, we want to have a badge for every student that's got a QR code, and we want them to be able to pull out their iPhone, scan the QR code, and then get a list of instructions. And I said, you guys got to be kidding me, right? No one's going to be like doing this in the middle of a crisis. People's mind, they just lose the intelligent part of their mind. They go to base reactions in situations like that. And the reason I use the traffic lights is because it happened to me. I was driving down the road and I was very tired one day. I got to a stop sign, and there was another car on the other side of the road that wanted to turn in front of me. And my brain froze, and it's because green doesn't always mean go. It means go, but there's certain situations, and my brain was so tired I couldn't remember what the situations were, so I just froze. And actually I wasn't the right, and I could have gone, but that's a really great example. The fire extinguisher is another example. I worked at a company, 2001, there was a fire, and the guy came out and he was livid with the security personnel, and he said, these things don't work. And of course, he'd forgotten that he needs to pull the thing out first. It's because he went into fight or flight mode, and he was just trying to use it, solve the problem there or then. And so this is where user-centered design comes in. And if we start combining user-centered design with AI, we can start producing some really, really cool things that make a big difference. So of course we need to sleep. We're not great multitaskers, especially men. And then there are only so many hours in a day as well. We also have cognitive biases. There's a whole list of these things on Wikipedia. The courtesy bias, that's where you will agree with someone because you don't want to offend anybody, and it's always, or you'll do something in a situation that makes it better for you socially. Why? Because of the scarf model, relatedness. Then you have the confirmation bias. So you'll see information and it'll be a little bit confusing, but you'll just take the stuff that confirms your worldview. Why? Because of certainty in the scarf model. And then the last one I want to touch on, and I've got a really cool video to show you, is called the focusing effect. And so in the focusing effect, it's where you pay attention to something more often than something else. So this is called the monkey business illusion. Count how many times the players wearing white pass the ball. Okay, so off they go. So we see the one pass there, another pass there, number 3, 4. I'll leave you guys to concentrate on that. So the correct answer is 16, but that's not the point. The point is there's a big gorilla that walks through the middle of the stage, and about 50% of people see the gorilla, and 50% of people don't see it. But the other thing is, even if you saw the gorilla, did you see the curtain change colour? Did you see that one of the people wearing black walked off? So unfortunately our brains, this focus on, I had it the other day, I was getting ready to merge onto a highway, the guy in front of me, off he went, and I could have sworn he went. And so my vision focused on the cars, and I saw a gap, I hit the accelerator, I turn around, my wife screams, and the guy's sitting right there. What happened is he'd gone and he put the brakes on at the last minute, and my focus had gone from him. And by the way, I think that's how the majority of rear ends actually happen. So that's another thing I wanted to mention, just because we humans have these problems, so this is why AI is going to be more useful. Will AI replace millions of jobs? So there was a 2015 study that showed technology created more jobs than it destroyed over a 140-year period. So we're talking pre-microprocessor, pre-internet to afterwards as well. The study was so impressive that it was shortlisted for an award that I'm not going to attempt to pronounce, and it basically summarized that it was that hard, dangerous, and dull jobs declined. So let's dig into this a little bit more. So it found that there was a massive increase in teaching and educational support assistants, in welfare, housing, youth, community workers, care workers. Essentially, the human touch. The human touch is what expanded. The repetitive tasks that can be done over and over again reduced. So we're essentially seeing what's coming just by looking at history. Muscle power workers reduced, knowledge worker jobs increased, productivity increased as well. This is why I said workplace happiness will increase with AI. As long as it's designed correctly, it will allow us to be more productive. There won't be as much resistance, like I've got to log into this system with this password, then I've forgotten this password because I never used this system for a year. All the hassle that goes into doing your job, well-designed AI can take care of that. But the most important point, luxury spending increased. The number of people that works as hairdressers skyrocketed over this period. And this is where customer experience comes in. So basically, cog in wheel work is going to start to go away, which is great because that's one of the things you always see people moaning about is, oh, I feel like a cog in a wheel in my current job. So yes, it's going to get rid of a lot of jobs, but it's going to create new jobs. And it's going to enhance existing jobs, make the job easier to do, make you more intelligent as a worker, and it will not replace jobs that require creativity. Creativity is going to be one of the most important skills in the next 2 decades. Nuanced human decision-making, strategic decision-making, and jobs that require a personal touch. You look at people that work as personal coaches and business coaches, those people are going to be the ones that we're going to see a lot more of them. I don't think there were too many of them 100 years ago, so that gives a good example. So what can we do about it? So technology is changing, but human needs remain rooted in that primal part of our brain. Never forget the scarf model. So here's what we do. We learn from our mistakes of the past. I would say technology up until this point has been badly designed. It's been designed to solve problems. Well, that's fine, but it's also created a ton of problems at the same time. What we want to do in the next phase, let's call this Tech 2.0, is design technology that solves problems but solves it in a human way. If you only remember one thing from the whole presentation today, please remember the words human-centered design. It's a wonderful movement. It's a new approach to building technology, to building solutions, to building processes in our organizations, and it helps people be happier and do better, and ultimately it benefits the client, which is the most important thing. We need to find ways to create delightful experiences using the tips I provided earlier, and you need to find ways to leverage creative workers. There is nothing more depressing than seeing a creative worker stuck in a job that they don't want to be in, and they can't really even add value. In fact, they're actually worse than normal people at that. We can put AI to work to help with jobs that are tedious, repeatable, so automate, like Tom mentioned earlier on. We must look in our businesses. How can we reduce the path of least resistance? How can we find things where it takes 2 clicks? Like maybe I don't want to go to a website and type in JMark and then go and find the information about Tom and read about the founder. Maybe I just want to say, hey Alexa, can you tell me something about the guy that's the CEO of JMark? And hopefully at that point, when technology's got to the point it needs to, you get that information. There's almost no point to go on a website anymore. Then you've got proactive service versus self-service. Self-service is a real big thing right now. Proactive service is the future. Solving problems before people even know about them, anticipating people's needs. So how can you get started using AI in your business? First of all, conduct research, look at blogs, books, white papers. I've authored a white paper for the Customer Experience Professionals Association, and there's going to be a link to it in these slides. So I want to encourage you guys to look at that. Then you treat AI as a product. So you put your product manager hat on and you imagine that you're rolling AI out in your organization if you were rolling any product out. So you want to make sure that all the users' needs are met, that the education is rolled out if there's going to be any hassle understanding it. If it's going to create some kind of a new workflow, like my banking example earlier on, you want to proactively communicate that out so that people aren't caught off guard and their experiences aren't disrupted. You want to be able to define the use cases very clearly for every type of user. What are they going to need from the system? You want to pilot. Customer co-creation is a great idea. Get your customers together with you and design things with them, and that way you can build around customer needs. So ensure your AI, these are some design considerations. Ensure your AI is solving the right problems. Don't just build AI for the sake of building AI. Decide what needs to be in scope. Everybody's going to have different things that they're going to need. So what you're going to need to do is make sure that you are able to prioritize. So you look at what the needs are, then you need to look at what's financially viable and what's technically feasible. There's something called a prioritization matrix that you can look at out there, and that basically just allows you to help prioritize projects that should be in scope of the project. Maybe they're not and they would be in a future version. You need to decide how you're going to measure success. For example, if you're going to put a chatbot out there, What do you want it to do? Do you want it to save so many man hours where someone human would have been on the chatbot? Do you want it to proactively be able to help people by answering a certain number of questions before escalating to a human? So you need to decide what matters, what you're going to measure. You need to think about how you're going to govern the evolution of the AI, because it's not just going to be a one and done rollout. Technology is going to evolve, the competitors are going to evolve, so you need to think of different ways about how are we as a company going to make sure that the AI stays competitive and is healthy. And so a way to do that is a steering committee, to have experts on board, to have cross-functional teams involved in the AI, and of course most important is to make sure the customer's always involved as well. And there's the link, which you guys will get the slides afterwards. I wanted to show you, we're coming to the end of the presentation, but I just want to show you something really cool here. This is a chatbot I've prototyped for JMark. So this is what the JMark website looks like right now. And there's a little thing on the bottom right-hand corner there, a little message icon. And the idea is that you can go and click on that. And then when you click on it, it pops up a little window. And it's a piece of software called Intercom, which a lot of people use now. And then you'll see there'll be an operator. But if there's no one there, then you'll get this thing that says, we're back tomorrow. And you're kind of stuck at that point. You just have to leave a message. And a lot of businesses, the place I live in right now, they're losing a lot of business because people are coming to ask questions and the business is closed. So the chatbot I've developed does a similar thing, but it's available 24/7. And this works a little differently from the chatbots of old. It doesn't pattern match. It doesn't look for my name is. What it does is it looks for something called intents. I use something called the Microsoft bot framework as my plumbing. But the actual engine that I built for JMark is its own engine. And it looks for patterns within the speech to understand what the intent someone's asking for. So here it's asked, you guys got any internships going? It knows that you guys typically means JMark. JMark have any internships going. And so it's able to respond with an appropriate message. And what I basically did is I took a year's worth of data from the humans that manned this system, and then I was able to cluster it into the different themes that come in as questions. And then once I had those clusters, I was then able to start generating the different responses. But they're not one and done responses though. Here's an example. We do sponsored screenings for movies, and we saw a lot of questions coming in like this. I RSVP'd, no one's got back to me. So there's a standard response here that we haven't got back to anybody because we've had a lot of interest, but then it says, would you like me to have someone follow up with you directly about this? So now you go into a kind of something that is understood by humans to be a thread that spars off from the conversation. So you're expecting them to say yes or no, but they might say sure. There's a number of different things they could say. And then what you can do is you can receive the information in a structured way. So they want you to get back in contact. Okay, that's great. You remember their name, you pre-populate their name, but then you actually give them the option to put their email and their phone number in as well. So that's kind of an example of some of the stuff that I'm building out here now, and a lot of places are doing it as well. It just makes sure that your business can be more present for customers who aren't necessarily going to come to you at working hours. So now I've got some predictions for the future, and Tom hadn't seen my slides and I hadn't seen his, so I'm glad they were very similar. So we'll rattle through these quickly. So your car will drive you to work, but many will work from home because of remote technology. Robots will stock the shelves, they'll do the heavy lifting. Your fridge, and Amazon already has this thing where you can put it on the fridge, but it will auto food for you when you're running low. Your kitchen will cook your meals. I disagree with Tom. I don't think a robot's going to sit there and do this for 10 minutes while you sit and watch it. I think that it knows when you're going to wake up and the food's going to be ready. And then homes will be 3D printed. Personal assistant technology will advance to enhance your work and home life. Your operating system will anticipate your needs. It will think about important dates and execute actions on your behalf. Many jobs that are currently done by a computer or phone will be handled by this agent technology. And I want to show you this agent technology to close the presentation. So this is something called Google Duplex, and they've created software that will make phone calls for you on your behalf. I'm going to play you a quick example. So it's quite impressive. Again, I don't necessarily know if there's a need for this though, because in the future, why have a machine make a phone call to a human when you can have a machine just API to another machine? And it's all done, there's no confusion, you take that human element out of it. And so the final thing I wanted to close on with the presentation today was to say, I started with the whole resistance is futile, the Star Trek reference, I'm sure you guys got it. But what I'm basically making the point of is that artificial intelligence will help us reduce that path of least resistance. And when you're in a world where Echo, book my haircut, do this, do that, someone's driving you to work, it's going to give us a lot of free time. And I really think it's going to be an important milestone in human history because it's going to give us more time to breathe and be present, not be distracted, assuming the technology is designed correctly, you won't be on a phone all the time. And when you have that, that allows you to come back to who you are and be engaged in the human experience. And I think it could be a big turning point for humanity. I know it's a bold prediction, but I mean, I can't really see it going any other way. A lot of it, though, as I said, it hinges on human-centered design and how seriously we all take that. So that's the close of my presentation, and I'd like to ask if anybody has any questions. Yes?
So you gave an example of AI in a normal business application from a customer service standpoint, being available 24/7. Are there any other low-hanging fruit examples for your average business to utilize AI?
Well, proactive tickets is a really good example as well. So what JMark's doing right now is they are building out the standards, because right now everyone's just got a whole bunch of different types of systems out there, and we're saying that's hurting the clients, it's hurting us. So what we're going to do is we're going to standardize those so they have best practices, they have the correct configuration, and then we scan them. And if we see that someone's CPU has been running at 100% quite a lot, we can proactively see there's an issue and the AI can let us know. The end goal would be the AI can, if it's something that's fixable with a configuration of machine, the AI can just go and fix it and the person wouldn't even have to know about it. But we'll make sure we let them know though so they know they're getting the value. But yeah, that would be a good example that's here and now. Yes?
Just a quick general question about AI. What is your opinion of all in the media now, there are two camps. One that says, watch out, AI is going to destroy the world. And the other guys say, no, you're crazy. And the people saying it, be careful of people who are very capable and intelligent people.
Yeah.
What do you think about that whole two camps thing that's developing around it?
So based on the information that I have at hand, I may not obviously know everything that goes on behind the scenes with governments. I would say that AI is no more of a threat than we just are as humans. I think there's been something like 50 odd near misses with nuclear devices in the last 100 years or since nuclear devices were created. So I'm not particularly worried about it, but it really comes down to how the AI is utilized. So if somebody is not creating what I say user-centered AI and someone misunderstands something and maybe presses the wrong button, you know, that kind of thing. I mean, it wouldn't be that extreme, but definitely there could be some problems there. There's a whole ethics committee that's been set up by the big companies now, Google and Apple and so forth, because they want to make sure that the artificial intelligence is used appropriately. It kind of harkens back to what we have with our medical information and giving that out and then people being able to use that against people. And so a lot of it will come down to ethics violations, and unfortunately I'm a believer that the more powerful a person or a company becomes, unfortunately the more corrupt that they are prone to become as well. So I would say that it probably is not going to be any worse than what we've had, but there will definitely be people that abuse it for sure. Yes?
I guess that's what I was going to ask you about. What do you think security will catch up to this? Is it tested like the Amazon Echo and the little Google thing? And they always are listening.
Yes, exactly, yes.
Don't think that it starts listening when you say, Alexa, do this.
Exactly.
And we've tested that by talking about things that we have not even dreamed of doing.
Yes.
And all of a sudden you'll start seeing in your search trends and your search stuff, it starts popping up.
Yeah, and that's
Your
why...
cell phone's doing the same thing.
Yeah, that's why there's a new search engine called DuckDuckGo, and they were specifically created because they're not going to use your own information against you like Google does. And so you might see this new wave of technologies coming out by smaller players, and then you might see the public start to say, well, we don't really want, we want our data used in certain ways and we don't want it used inappropriately, so we're going to move vendor. And so you might see that stuff kind of happening as well. Certainly DuckDuckGo is growing in popularity already. Yes?
In the two different kind of fields of AI created for supplementing the human work or experience and then replacing the human work or experience, have you seen one side or the other
Well, the main trend right now, even IBM is saying this as well, is in augmenting the human worker. So basically, any job that you do, being able to give you better tools to do your jobs better. But there obviously is, as we've seen with certain types of jobs going away completely, that will happen. But the overall net effect is going to be more positive than it is negative if we can rely on what we've seen in history. And I would argue that the AI revolution isn't going to be as hugely disruptive as the revolution of the microprocessor and the internet. So I would expect the trend to continue, maybe even not as extreme. But hey, I can't predict the future, so these are just my opinions. Yes?
I was just wondering, how do you get businesses to understand the significance of the cost for the business?
So the best thing I would recommend to do is I've written a white paper that's referenced in these slides, and that talks about a whole different number of areas. It talks about from the customer experience point of view and from the business point of view, and the ROIs that are attached to AI. What I would say from a very high level overview is that the best way to look at ROI for AI is to look at ROI for customer experience. So to give you a real quick example, there was a big study done by the London School of Economics a few years ago, and they said that by a ratio of 5-to-1, if you just fix broken experiences and make them more consistent, it's going to be much more profitable by a ratio of 5-to-1 than if you're just out there creating these amazing little one-offs, but you've still got the broken experiences. So if you use that as your model for the ROI, and then you use your AI to make that happen, to be the executor, that's how you can convince your CEO, for example, to invest in AI.
All right, guys, that's pretty awesome.
Thank you.
Just want to thank Mike for sharing.
Thank you, guys.